Well, you know, when you meet Jesus Christ as your Savior, God sets your life on a course that can literally not only transform you, but it can change the lives of people around you. It changes your family, and in some cases, it can even change a whole neighborhood, have an impact on a city. Certain evangelists have had impacts on whole countries. And the man that you're about to meet was assigned to the pastorate 19 years ago in an area that they called God's Alcatraz. But today, the whole neighborhood has a new face thanks to something called the Church Unusual. Here to explain is the pastor of the Church Unusual, St. Paul Community Baptist Church, Pastor Johnny Ray Youngblood. Please welcome Pastor Youngblood. Pastor Youngblood, good to see you, sir.
All right.
Nice to have you on the program today.
Good to be here.
The Church Unusual.
That's what we call it.
Why?
Well, we tend to do some things that are not quite orthodox, and we call it leaving it to the Spirit, and we are able to make things happen that are sometimes considered to be outside of the purview of the local church. But we're excited about it.
Give us some examples of those things.
Well, one of the things that we do is we now have a board of elders, which is not normal for, quote, a Baptist church, but it is biblically based from Numbers chapter 11 and from 1 Timothy chapter 3 and from Acts chapter 6. We also have a full-time staff in that community, and that is not usual. We were able to start our own elementary school because public education definitely had a lot of questions surrounding it, and one, of course, was the taking of prayer out of the school. And then we began to become ecumenically involved with Roman Catholics, Lutherans, Baptists, Pentecostals, and we began to work on our community, because if the lighthouse is in the dark, then the dark somehow or another should flee. And we decided that rather than curse the darkness, we would light candles.
Not just a candle, but it sounds like you lit a big searchlight here, an halogen searchlight here.
Yeah, well, in this day and time, a searchlight is needed. And we've been able to put together 2,300 single-family owner-occupied row houses.
Whoa, don't rush through that so fast. You put together what?
We've put together a plan called the Nehemiah Plan, and that's to deal with housing in a different kind of way. And we've built 2,300 single-family owner-occupied row houses. And not only that, we've cut a deal with the mayor of New York that we will, in time, January of '94, begin the building of 1,300 more. That is being duplicated now in the South Bronx, in South Texas, in Southern California, in Baltimore.
I don't know about you. That sounds like that deserves a round of applause to me. That's marvelous.
Very exciting. Very exciting.
Whenever you hear, unfortunately, particularly in the secular media, whenever you hear anything about the inner city, all you hear is the gloom, the doom, the tragedy, the hopelessness, and in fact, some way, the justification of the violence is going on there.
Well, that's just in many ways media living up to its motto that no news is good news. And whenever there's good news, it doesn't sell newspapers, it doesn't get ratings. But we decided that since we are the ecclesia, and it is our responsibility to preach the evangelion, the good news, that we have to be about good news, and then we work in every way possible to get that good news out.
Well, now, let me ask you this, Pastor, because when you look at, for example, what's going on in L.A., now, where you are is an area that could legitimately be considered depressed, inner city, meets all the criteria, does it not?
That's right.
Now, why have, in the area where you are, have there not been riots and violence and burning down of the communities? Because you're faced with a lot of the same difficulties.
Well, I really have to be honest and say that when the LA riots took place, and I do have a problem with the word riot because I've noticed even in media they tend to change the language when it comes down to the ethnic group. When some things happen, it's called activity. When other things happen, it's called riots. But one of the things that I know is that our community is a tinderbox, and it could happen, and there was some waiting during that time. I think the mayor did a good job of kind of keeping a lid on, but also I must say that in our community particularly, people were waiting to kind of hear what clergy had to say, and we were able to kind of keep a lid on it. But, you know, we're still tense about what's happening.
But you're doing something about the circumstances. I mean, you could sit around and become one of the people who stood up and say, hey, okay, let's burn this place down. But you're talking about building owner-occupied row houses. Does that change the way people view an area that they live in if they own or participate?
It definitely does. One of the reasons people raise the questions a lot of times, they say of African Americans, why do they burn their own neighborhoods? They're not really their neighborhoods. This community where I am, like a lot of other communities where African Americans are concentrated, was a victim of planned shrinkage, which is a governmental style of withdrawing city services, and it was also a victim of absentee landlordism, and it was also a victim of redlining. And when those things go to happening, you literally kind of suck the life out of communities so that people who go out to work, when they come back in, the people even there doing business do not live in that community, and they take the money out. So there's a kind of setup where despair is incubated in those communities, and that must change.
So people don't have a stake in the community, they have no stake in the society, so naturally, as we showed in that piece earlier, here was an owner of a store who says, I will be there to protect my store with my life. It's my store.
Exactly, and he will be respected for that. He will be respected for that. And in terms of St. Paul's Ministries, we are now working. In fact, what we've already done is we acquired 11 pieces of property because they were owned by people in another area code. And what we decided is, since they weren't going to keep the property up, but they were just going to suck the life out of those communities, we decided that we would buy them. Now, I must say that I started out the traditional way of praying, asking God to run them out, and then God spoke to me and said, well, why don't you buy the buildings and then you run them out? And lo and behold, we were able. St. Paul's rallied, bought the buildings. We had a numbers joint there. And when we got the property, what we did was notified the police that it was our property and there were illegal activities going on, and they were welcome to perform their duties. There is now a pediatric clinic there.
Hallelujah. That's good news, man.
And there was another place there that was known for drugs, prostitution, and some other things, and they fortunately did not pay their rent, so we were able to get them evicted, and there's now a restaurant there. So there are ways that we must take charge and flex the democratic muscle in order to really allow our nation to live up to its iridescent possibilities and to have the good news of Jesus Christ be made flesh in our own day and time.
I've got to ask you this because, frankly, this is like one of the first times I've heard of this kind of thing going on. Why is this the exception rather than the rule?
Well, first of all, you know the book that's been written on St. Paul's community, Upon This Rock. I think that the reason it doesn't get out and the reason it is the exception is sometimes we just spend more time feeling sorry for ourselves and cursing the darkness, and we tend to listen to media too much rather than look at the possibilities from the study of the good news and then seeing people for their essential worth as creatures and destined to be children of God.
I've got to ask you this question because it sounds to me like you are going in there saying, excuse me, but there is no justification for a house of prostitution, for crack houses, and for numbers joints and these places to exist in our communities just because we happen to be depressed inner city people, quote, unquote.
Right. Well, I'm working on two fronts, and I've discovered that God works that way also, because, you know, when he was telling Moses on Midian to go down to Egypt, he was also in Egypt telling Aaron Moses is on his way. So I've learned to work on two fronts. Yes, I am saying that to the people of that community, but also it is necessary to hold accountable people who are so-called public servants, to let them know that the doom, the despair that they talk about, and they're being bereft of imagination, and they're being bereft sometimes even of native intelligence in terms of how to change this thing and make it happen, that the possibilities are still there. And so I kind of represent what I would call a third sector. I mean, government can't do it all by themselves. The private sector cannot do it all by themselves. They tend to be against each other. So I kind of represent the third sector, and that is people who have a high degree of native intelligence, imagination, and, Brother Ben, enough social anger with values attached to it. And for us, it is the belief in Jesus Christ and our history as the African American church in this country, which has always been positive, perhaps a bit narrow and confined sometimes, but always positive. I'm saying that things can change, things must change, and as long as I'm alive, things will change day by day.
You mentioned something, there's a particular situation in your book where you talked about some of this social anger. Apparently the bus was stopping at a wrong place and ladies had to, well, not only just ladies, but whoever was catching the bus had to walk through these dangerous neighborhoods. And they said, well, we want something done about this. And you held a meeting on that.
Yeah, we held a meeting, and the public servants had the bus stop moved back to where it was relatively safe for the people in that community. There's another story of a drug dealer having told one of my young men one day to get off of the corner. He was cleaning on a Saturday. We were in preparation for Sunday's gathering. And he came in early, and I asked if you finished, and he said, yeah. And I said, you've done everything?
Awful quick.
Yeah, and he said, well, the drug dealer told me to get off the corner. I said, the drug dealer told you to get off the corner? He said, yeah. I said, did you tell him you were there for us? He said, yeah, he didn't care. And I said, well, I can't take this. So I gathered up about 25 men, and we went out, and we confronted him and told him we were not going to have it. We were just not going to have it. There was no reason for it. We were not going to have it. And then that Sunday morning, we went to service. I couldn't worship, Brother Ben. The people were ready to worship, but I couldn't worship because I could not stand the whole idea of being confined like that. And I knew that there were certain businesses in the community that indeed were dispensing drugs. So I asked about 300 of the men that were there that morning to come and go with me. So we left the ladies and the children in church praying.
On Sunday morning?
On Sunday morning. And we went out with our Bibles and our robes and went into each store to let them know we would burn them down before we allowed that to continue to happen.
Yes! Now that's church.
Well, I think so. I think so.
But now people would say, well, brother, that's not loving. And
that's why we call church unusual. It's tough love.
So what you're saying then, specific, and I like the point that you said you took 20 or 30 black men with you the first time, and the second time you took 300 men with you. Specifically, one of the things that seems to be missing in not only the black community, we don't want to, but in a lot of the inner city communities, Hispanic, Puerto Rican, whatever, is this lack of strong male leadership in the family.
Yes, it is, and that's unfortunate. What happens to us as clergy is that we get to the point that we recognize who is there, and we kind of become satisfied with who is there, and we become so satisfied that we fail to recognize who is not there. I was like that. The church was packed on Sunday morning, and I was having a good time. And the Spirit kind of created in me this peculiar sense of loneliness. And I discovered that there were just brothers not there for me to relate to. Now, there were brothers there, but the robust, energetic, genius-like brothers were not there. They were either in jail or they were on the streets or just finding things to do other than. They were kind of like the man from Gadara. They were every place but home, but church, but school, but employed. And when you look at the scriptures, Jesus never had a problem winning men. So if Jesus never had a problem winning men, what is it with the church that keeps us from being able to win men? And I prayed about it, and I became intentional. I mentioned that I recognized the lack of men, and I began to work on it. And as I began to work on it and send out intentional calls, I even challenged the ladies, tell your man I said I want to see him on Sunday morning. Just get him here. Just get him here. And they took the message. And when they took the message, the brothers started showing. Then I had to do some things. The Spirit convicted me to the point that I had to be reconciled to my father, who is an African-American male, in order for me to adequately and authentically do ministry to African-American men.
Now, tell me about that. What do you mean you had to be reconciled to your father, who was an African-American?
My father was in the home with us, and my father was emotionally absent. And he was not all that, quote, we felt a father should be. He was not a Huxtable. He was not a father knows best. And somehow or another, we failed to recognize the circumstances of his growing up and the era in which he lived. And we just held him accountable for things that he just could not live up to, because even the title father can dehumanize a person. And the Lord said to me, your father's an African-American male. He has suffered the experience here in America as any other African male, and you must understand that, and you must be reconciled to him. I've been reconciled to my father now for 4 years. I was 40 years old when that happened. And when my doing that and testifying about it, other brothers started to go literally to the cemetery and spend time there being reconciled to their fathers, because we believe, Robert Bly, who's doing a lot of work with men now, that if you don't get it together with your father, you walk around with a hole in your soul.
Now, this is not just black men. You're talking, this is a male problem.
It is
men
a male
across.
problem.
What happens if a man is not reconciled to his father, white or brown or red or yellow?
Well, something just comes up missing. I don't know exactly what it is. I've just recently met Robert Moore, and I'm hoping to meet Robert Bly, and maybe the three of us will do some work together. But there's something, I know Bly calls it motor feeding, that in a man and his son standing together next to each other, something automatically, in the words of the tradition, I understand you from Texas, it runs from heart to heart and from breast to breast.
Yes.
And fathers don't hug. Fathers do not say, I love you. Fathers do not even kiss. Because there is this allegation that in doing that to your son, you somehow or another effeminize the son. I'm saying that that is not true. I have 3 wonderful sons, and I will hug, kiss, say I love you anywhere, because they are that important to me. They're flesh of my flesh, blood of my blood. And if that is our theology, that God the Father tells us that he loves us, in the prodigal son story, the father kissed his son, the father welcomed his son, the father let him go, but he also anxiously anticipated his return. So there are demeanors and behavior toward our sons that we as fathers must have. And I will say, along, I guess, somewhat with the feminist movement, that I do not want to leave the rearing of my children totally to the woman, and we men must not do that.
This is particularly a problem that's associated with the African American community. There are a lot of matriarchal households, particularly on welfare. And some of the challenges that have come down is that young black males without fathers have a tendency to be more violent and less apt to maintain law than those who have strong father figures.
I think there is a degree of truth to that, and I think that we as the African American church have to compensate for that. I am now working with a group of men 55 years and older who will be our elders, who will be our mentors, and I'm saying to them, you owe us something. So I'm working with them, and then we're putting together a Big Brother program that is not the usual Big Brother program that has so much structure that you can't really interact with the young men. And the philosophy of the extended family, the reality of the extended family, which is of African origin, is something that must be implemented, because while boys may not have men in the homes, there are still men around who can reach out and touch. I know, because during the time of emotional absence with my father, there were men who still touched my life.
Your church has made a difference. The power of God moving through your church has made a difference in your neighborhood. I mean, you have seen a difference in the lives of individuals. What do you think perhaps is the greatest difference that has been made in the life of your church in general, and in the impact the church has had on the community?
I really think that it is the teaching of the good news, which is the forgiveness of Jesus Christ. Somehow or another, we can tend to teach a kind of Old Testament legalism to the point that people despair about themselves even after they've come to Christ. I think the reality of life is that even after you've accepted Christ, every now and then you might slip a little bit. You might, you don't get amnesia to the point that you have forgotten that from which you were saved. And to tell people that you can get forgiveness and that we are not evil people. We are people struggling every day, just trying to deal with life. And He looks beyond our faults and He sees our needs, and His grace is sufficient, and His strength is made perfect in our weakness, and His mercy endureth forever. And people then feel that maybe this business of second birth, second chance is a reality.
Can this thing be duplicated across America?
I have no doubt about it. I think as long as you are biblically based and theologically sound, it can become the status quo.
Ladies and gentlemen, the book, The Miracles of a Black Church Upon This Rock, written by Samuel J. Friedman, the story of Pastor Johnny Ray Youngblood and the church that he is the church unusual. Brother, God bless you. Thank you for coming to
Good to be here. It was a pleasure to have you.
Bless you. Pray for us. All right. God bless you. We'll be back with more as the 700 Club continues right after this break. Stay where you are. God bless you.